Hey, folks. We're just going to do a quick little intro here because we have some information to share with you. First of all, very excited. Wait, I'm here with Brian. Say something, Brian.
Hello.
We're here, and we just wanted to just let you know a few things. First of all, I was super excited that Johnny Pezvalsky, who played the Heavy in Mordecai, gave us a shout out on Instagram, and it made me feel bad that we never mentioned his name on the podcast. His mustache was really great too. In some ways, even more impressive than Mordecai's mustache. I think that's one of the things that made the film have balance. I mean, if they had had a villain with a lesser mustache, I don't think I would have bought it. So,
and it just shows what a generous actor Johnny Depp is, that he can let another mustache kind of overshadow his in certain scenes, and he's totally okay with that.
Yeah, he's very confident in his mustache. So, hope you enjoyed that episode. And what else do we have to tell people, Brian?
Well, we're happy to be on the Paper House Network. We've been a part of their team for a few weeks now, and it's been fun and fruitful, and they've just been a great home for us.
Yeah. And if you found us through Paper House Network, let us know. Let us know that this relationship is a fruitful one. And we hope you do check out the podcasts that we run the ads for on our show. You'll be hearing some ads, promos for other podcasts, and those are some of our Paper House brethren and sisterin. I don't think sisterin is that the word.
What is the word? sister, brethren, and sisterin.
And speaking of sisterin, we're going to do some sisterin on this episode because we're talking about Barbara Stanwyck, who's someone who I'm a pretty big fan of, and as listeners will find out, you're coming to her. She's this new hot talent for you.
Yeah, I've never heard of this Barbara Stanwyck.
Barbara Sandwich. No, Barbara Stanwyck. And so we brought in a ringer, an expert, Kristen Lopez of the Ticklish Business podcast, to give us some schooling in the ways of Barbara Stanwyck. And so halfway through this podcast, we'll cut away to an interview with her. And you'll love it. You should check out her podcast, Ticklish Business. And something else I was thinking about? There was one thing we didn't talk about in this episode, Brian, and I want to bring it up with you. Now, it's impossible that Stanley Kubrick was not aware of the film The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, and because he was notorious for seeing everything. Everything. He would see everything at a time when you could still see everything. And between 1946 and when he made Dr. Strangelove, there were no other films that were called Strange Love that had never been used before. So he must have been aware of the film. Do you feel like
yeah?
Do you feel like it's possible? And this film feels, I don't want to say Kubrickian, but it doesn't feel un-Kubrickian.
Well, he made two movies with Kirk Douglas, so it must have been in his mind. It's some, whether he intended or not, he must have been aware of this.
Yeah,
the word "strange love,"
Yeah, I think it's something to think about. I just think it's something to think about. And while I've been editing the episode, I've been thinking, we should have mentioned that, and now we have. So, without any further ado, let's just get to this episode. How about it, Brian?
I love it.
Andras here. When I'm not co-hosting The World Is Wrong podcast, I'm hosting and producing the Radio 8-Ball podcast, where we answer questions by picking songs at random, like picking musical tarot cards. We've hosted musical divinations for people like John C. Reilly, Patricia Arquette, Tig Notaro, and Fred Armisen, and hosted over 200 songwriters, providing the randomly chosen answers from Inara George and Dan Byrne to Mose Allison and Alan Toussaint. That's Radio 8-Ball, all one word. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and download our app from the iTunes App Store.
I'm Larry Bishop, and you're listening to The World Is Wrong podcast.
We're here to tell you how the world is wrong. The
The Strange Love of Martha Ivers. From 1946. We are the World is Wrong podcast. I'm Andras Jones.
I'm Brian Connolly.
And this is the Extremely Positive podcast, where we talk about and celebrate films, TV, and other arts that are really misjudged and misused by society. And we're here to resurrect them, to give them their day and their due.
Yeah.
What film are we talking about today?
The Strange Love of Martha Ivers.
Yeah, we said that already, didn't we?
It's good to remind ourselves.
Yes. And this was my choice. So I'm so excited to hear what you thought about it. This is a film that I've watched many, many times. I think I teased out in the last episode that there was a particular little treat in there for you that when I saw and realized that we were going to be talking about it, made me very happy, and I can't wait to talk with you about. So, ask your questions.
All right. Well, I guess with this one, this is the oldest movie we've done so far. You went way back. So, how did you first see this movie? Like, how did you hear about this movie? Because I never heard of this movie, despite the star power within it.
Okay, so first of all, we should just say that A Strange Love of Martha Ivers is directed by Milestone, who directed All Quiet on the Western Front and many other films, and it stars Barbara Stanwyck, Van Heflin, Lizbeth Scott, and the screen debut of Kirk Douglas and another young actor who will go on to direct many classic films that we will be discussing in the show in the future. And how this is one of those things, the death of video stores. There was a video store closing in Seattle, and I had just gone in to look. I didn't know they were closing, but they were selling a bunch of their stock. And I remember I bought The Strange Love. I just saw the title, The Strange Love of Martha Ivers and Barbara Stanwyck, and I was like, yeah, I gotta check this out. I love Barbara Stanwyck. We'll be talking a lot about her and why I think she's a perfect topic for our show. But I remember I got that, and I got The Big Red One, which I hadn't seen since I was a child. Probably not the extended version. And several others. Maybe there was like Pickup on 52nd Street was in there. There was just a treasure trove of really great ones. But the one that jumped out to me was The Strange Love of Martha Ivers. It was... the film inside was even better and more exciting to me than the cover was, and I would have been happy with a much lesser film, and still would have enjoyed it. But this is a movie that just keeps giving, getting to. Well, should I give a? Well, let's see. I forget our format. There's a heat wave going on where I am. And I'm sleep deprived, and you gotta help me. And I'm also just high on Barbara Stanwyck.
We're still learning. Maybe our format is a very loose one. Maybe we don't have a format. We just jump around.
Okay.
Why don't you say give us a little description of what this movie's about before we dig into it.
How long has he been here?
He came in last night.
Did he tell you much about himself, where he's been, what he's been doing?
I thought you'd ask what he wanted.
What does he want?
He's playing it smart.
Sam was always a smart boy.
All he wanted was for me to get his girl out of jail.
His girl?
That's what he said he wanted.
What do you think he wants?
What he can get. He's a gambler, a sharpshooter, an angle boy. They come through my office by the hundreds. Couldn't you see blackmail in his eyes?
I haven't your experience with criminals.
You will. When Sammy starts to shake you down.
Release the girl. Maybe he'll just pick her up and leave.
Leave? Do you think he'll leave a touch worth millions?
There's only one way you'll find out. Release the girl.
This is the story of 3 kids who grew up in this town, Iverstown, and Martha Ivers is the black sheep of the Ivers family. Her father was the heir of this great fortune, and he married her mother, and her mother died, and then her father died, and now she's being raised by her evil, I guess, grandmother. And so she's growing up in this life, but she wants to escape from it. And she has these two kids that she hangs out with, that one of them is this bad boy from the wrong side of the tracks, and the other is this sort of studious little hangdog kid who follows her around. And one rainy night, they're going to leave. She decides she's going to leave town with the kid from the wrong side of the tracks. And that night, some shenanigans go down, and he has to leave without her. And there's a murder that's committed, and all of this goes down in the beginning of the movie. And I'm not going to give all of it away, but basically, cut to 17 years or more later. I guess they say it's 17 years in the film. It feels like it's a little bit more, but now that kid from the wrong side of the tracks is Van Heflin, in just being super cool in this movie. You probably know him most as the sort of the weak husband from Shane, who turns out to be like a better man, but he's definitely not Shane. He's the one Shane's sticking up for.
Yeah.
But in this, he looks like Jimmy Cagney, and he acts like Humphrey Bogart, but with a little bit more romantic air to it. I think he's great in it. Anyway, you can see why Barbara Stanwyck is still carrying a little bit of a torch for him. Anyway, he arrives back in town sort of accidentally. He's involved in a little car crash with a hitchhiker, and that hitchhiker is
Mr. Blake Edwards.
You're so excited about this. We'll talk about it. We're just going to tease that.
All right. I'll wait.
And so he has this car crash, and he's like, oh, I'm going to look around town. And he's come back to town, and now Iverstown is now fully in the hands of Martha Ivers and her husband, who is that simpering kid who followed her around. And that simpering kid is the arrival on screen of, I want to grab the clip from The Gravy Train.
Kirk Douglas! Look at me! Kirk fucking Douglas!
So it's Kirk Douglas in a kind of role that we will never see him in again.
Nope.
And the career that he might have had, you sort of feel like he could have been like a tougher Montgomery Clift, but he became like I don't know, a softer Robert Ryan or something. Anyway, so now we have our trio, and this Kirk Douglas character is now a politician. He's on his way to be the governor, and we're told maybe to be president someday. And this is all because of Martha Ivers. And Van Heflin showing up in town sets off Kirk Douglas's fears that he's going to try and blackmail them because he somehow knows about the murder in the past, which Van Heflin doesn't. And Martha Ivers is also nervous, but she also is kind of turned on, and she wants this guy to stick around. And you kind of think she maybe wants to throw Kirk Douglas over for Van Heflin. But Van Heflin is having none of it. He's too cool for all of it. And meanwhile, he's beginning a beautiful little love affair with Lizbeth Scott, who is sort of Lauren Bacalling it all over the place in this film.
For sure.
And, since we didn't get as much of Lizbeth Scott as we got of Lauren Bacall, I feel like she, in this powerhouse of stars, she kind of sticks out as the most compelling in some ways. And I think there are some who will, we're going to get into a little bit of the backstory. There's a really interesting backstory in the making of this film that we'll get into that might explain some of that. But I don't know if I really want to tell much more about it. That sets up this conflict. I guess the thing to know about Lizbeth Scott is that she's just gotten out of a 5-year hitch in prison. She got hooked up with a bad guy. He gave her a stolen coat, something like that. And then now she's just gotten out of prison, and Kirk Douglas and his political goons are basically putting leverage on her to try and get to Van Heflin. And this really, this is what steals Van Heflin for the, I guess, second and third acts of the film, when he starts to bring his own brand of, I don't know, retribution onto the Iverses. The Ivers? Anyway.
Yeah.
And there are there's some great cameos in this. It's a real rewatching it again, it's really hard not to see this as a film that really exists in the shadow of Citizen Kane. And it feels in a lot of ways very like if Citizen Kane was made as a woman's picture with Stanwyck at the center of it, then it's not so much like about Orson Welles's, it's aesthetically, it feels Citizen Kane-like. And, these films bookend World War II. Citizen Kane is right at the beginning, and this is 1946, right at the end, which, I think there's some interesting historical stuff to get in there. So I didn't even tell you why the world is, well, I guess now I got to tell you why the world is wrong about this film, right?
Why is the world wrong about this film, Andras?
Brian. Barbara Stanwyck. Why people, I don't want to take anyone else down, but why we don't speak of her in the same way that we speak, not just this sexism, obviously, she should be spoken of in the way we talk about, Bogart and Cagney and Cary Grant, and like she should be spoken of reverentially like that, like Clark Gable. She mops the floor with Clark Gable. Not that I don't know if they were ever, I'm sure they were in movies together, but she's just so much better. But the sort of the great female actresses, the great actresses of her era, like Bette Davis and Katharine Hepburn, compared to Barbara Stanwyck, they're just not fun. Like, I mean, Bette Davis can be very fun. They both can be very fun. But Barbara Stanwyck is just on a whole other level to me, and her career she has such a huge career with so many high points. I feel like if Barbara Stanwyck held a place in cinema history, in our conversation about cinema history that she deserves, everyone would know about Strange Love of Martha Ivers the way we know about In a Lonely Place for Bogart.
Yeah.
Like, it's one of the smaller films, but because it's smaller, it should be one of the most favorite, I think.
Yeah.
So I think that's the main thing. And then I also have a theory about historically why it may not have gotten the success in its time that it might have deserved on its own merits, which might have given it a greater place in the critical pantheon. And that has to do very much with the beginning of the McCarthy era. This was 1946. And there's a scene, I'm actually going to play a little clip. There's a scene in the movie Trumbo where Dalton Trumbo, played by Bryan Cranston, has an argument at a party with the director Sam Wood, who directed Kitty Foyle that Dalton Trumbo was a writer on. And they're arguing about the set dressers strike, which took place, which I guess was a very divisive in Hollywood in the late 40s and set up some of the conflicts that would come out with the blacklist.
Mayor lined up the A-team. Sam Wood to shoot, Dalton Trumbo for rewrites.
I had no crew,
So,
I couldn't
fingers
work.
crossed.
You wouldn't work. God forbid you cross a picket line. For set builders, what the hell do set builders have to do with writing?
What writers write, builders build. What they build, you shoot. Now, you make all the money you possibly can, so do I. Why shouldn't they? And why can't we help them?
Listen to you, the swimming pool Soviet.
Oh, for God's sakes, you won, Sam. The strike is over, and you just might try being a gracious winner. No, it's never over with you people.
Strike after strike after strike.
Whatever it takes to see justice.
Hey, you know what?
We've all had
What are we all
Oh,
6
come
months
on,
off?
Sam.
Listen, I'm going to go on strike.
Good for you.
Against people who go on strike.
And I won't cross your picket line either.
Oh, give me that, Trumbo. You just You know what?
And Lewis Milestone, who directed Strange Love of Martha Ivers, he basically walked off the set halfway through in solidarity with the set dressers.
Wow.
And what's interesting about this film is that it ends up being really great, despite the fact that it is not directed by one director. And I guess it's produced by Hal Wallace. All of these major Hollywood people are involved in it. Robert Riskin is uncredited as the co-screenwriter on it. And he goes back with Barbara Stanwyck all the way to a film, one of her early films, and his first film, a film called Illicit, during the pre-code era. That's how far back Stanwyck goes, to the 1920s, when the mid to late 1920s, when she first emerged on the scene as a star, working with Robert Riskin. And then she brings Riskin, I'm sure she brings Riskin back when the production starts to get weird, to be the script doctor. Anyway, so all of this is going on, and this film comes out, and I think it's great, but it's got the taint of maybe these people who made it aren't totally loyal to the new America that John Wayne and Hedda Hopper and others like them are trying to bring to pass. And so we're just not going to give much love to this film with a director who stood with the strikers instead of Hollywood. And Barbara Stanwyck, I don't know what her relationship was to the Blacklist, but there's just a lot of complications in this that make me think that at the time it would just be seen as a troubled production, and it was like that shitty film Citizen Kane that everyone hated.
Because it's definitely not. It's not a. There's nothing. It's a sad movie. It's a depressing movie, like Citizen Kane. Like, you're not having fun watching this movie.
And the corruption of power, and the company is evil, and the people who have all the money are evil.
Politicians are evil. Like, the police aren't great. Like, and the person who's the one you're supposed to like is the one who ran away and got the hell out of there.
Right.
You know, that's the one. That's your hero. The one who did everything you're not supposed to do. Didn't even contact his family. He's the one we're supposed to be relating to.
He's also supposedly a war hero. Like, every time they try and get some dirt on him, they make this point of being like, oh wow, his war record is pretty exemplary. He fought at Anzio, and all, they list these three. And we would imagine in 1946, when you're saying that he fought at all these places, that has this huge resonance for the people who are watching, that immediately make you like Van Heflin. If people had gotten a chance to see this film, I really feel like if people had seen this film, Van Heflin would have been a much bigger star.
Yeah. And it's interesting, having him be this war hero makes it all the more upsetting that everyone keeps treating him like total garbage. He gets the hell beaten out of him. Everywhere he goes, people are just not great to him. Especially from trickling down from Kirk Douglas through the police and all this. Everyone just treats him like garbage. It kind of reminded me a little bit of First Blood, when you have John Rambo walk into town and he's like, I'm a veteran, and everyone's like, well, we don't want you here, and we're going to make your life miserable. I'm sorry. We don't care that you're a war veteran. We don't like you. Get out of here.
But Lizbeth Scott, immediately, she just loves him so much.
And I love her.
Yeah.
And she, the only other thing I ever saw in was Scared Stiff, the Martin and Lewis movie, another Hal Wallace production. And she definitely kind of comes with that Paramount package of this movie. This movie has that great Paramount Pictures quality. You have your Hal Wallace producer, you have Edith Head doing the costumes, and then with that you also get a Lizbeth Scott who's great. And you're right, the whole time I couldn't stop thinking about how much she just seemed like a less tough Lauren Bacall.
Yeah. And there's some story about this. So supposedly that was one of the things that Louis Milestone said after, he would never work with Hal Wallace again because he made him reshoot. They made them do all these reshoots with Lizbeth Scott to amp up her role. So there's there's some commentary that feels like her influence on the film made it worse, that the third act becomes more about her and her and Van Heflin and less about the Iverses, which I don't necessarily agree with that critique, but it makes a lot of sense with what we, and everything I know about Hollywood, that I can see the producer who loved this young ingenue saying, we're going to, who cares about all the other people? We need to make this film look good for Lizbeth Scott because she's going to be the next Lauren Bacall. Interesting bit of synchronicity. Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart are supposedly the ones who introduced Hal Wallace to Kirk Douglas. And this really was his first film. He changed his name to Doug. This was him, like, I'm going to be a movie star now. That wasn't his real name, Douglas. What was his?
Yeah. Is it like Izzy Dembski? Is that his real name?
Isher Danielovich Dembski. Isher Danielovich Dembski, which again, you can imagine that these commies, they got this Russian Jewish kid, Kirk Douglas. He's no Douglas. He's a Dembski if I ever saw him. So, like the prejudice, and people might be thinking, but Kirk Douglas went on to be a star. Well, not because of this film. It was because of the boxing film he did. Champion in 1949 was the one that really made him a star, but he was in Out of the Past in 1947. So people who were around saw this and was like, this kid is pretty good. And he is.
It's so funny. Like when you first see the picture of him, you have Ben Heflin be like,
Does that guy look like a scared little boy to you?
He looks like he's going to cry any minute. Let's get away from him.
And you're like, that's not a scared little boy. That's Kirk Douglas. He can fight a bear. Like, what are you talking about? And like, and it's interesting. Like when the first scene with him, where the lady one of the first, not the first scene, but the first scene with him in his office, and Ben Heflin's there to see him, and the lady comes in and says like, "Oh, your old friend, Sam is here." There's a moment of panic where Kirk Douglas is like, "I don't want to do it. I don't want to talk to him." And then he like all of a sudden is like, "Wait a minute. No, I will be tough. I will pretend to be tough. I will pretend to be the Kirk Douglas you will soon know and love in other movies, and I have to do that right now to deal with this situation." And I love that scene, that little shift he does from scared little boy to, I got to pretend to be Kirk Douglas now.
Well, you know what? We're going to talk more about it, obviously, but I didn't really get a chance. So I guess this is the point in the show where I'm so curious. I want to get your take on it. You just saw it for the first time.
It was very interesting because it wasn't like, the tone of it is very strange, and you're right. It is in a way like Citizen Kane, because you're watching it and you're like, okay, is this it kind of starts off feeling like a gothic sort of thing. It feels like Rebecca or something at the beginning with the evil mom, evil grandmother in this dark, sad house. And you're like, oh, it's going to be this kind of movie. But then it kind of starts to feel kind of like a film noir. And you're like, oh, this is a film noir. And then you're like, no, this is like a melodrama. And it's just like, the movie keeps kind of changing its tone. And it kind of is its own thing, much like Citizen Kane. Like, what is Citizen Kane? I guess you could say it's a drama, but it's also got elements of all these other types of genres in one movie. And I really like that this movie, you can't peg this movie down, and maybe that's another reason why it's not remembered so much by people, because it's not like a classic film noir, and it's not a straight up melodrama. It's just sort of like a mishmash of a lot of different tones kind of blended together. And I liked that. I liked that about it. I found it to be a very interesting movie because I did not know what was going to happen or how it was going to. Because you think too the whole time, you're like, oh, this is a Kirk Douglas, Barbara Stanwyck movie, but honestly, they're not really in it a lot. They're kind of more in the end, like you said, and it is more about like Lizbeth Scott and Van Heflin hanging around, and they're kind of talking about Martha and Walter a bunch. So I found that interesting too, that they weren't. They're the stars, but they're not the stars. They're more like the presence of Martha Ivers is throughout the whole movie, so she is the star. But Barbara Stanwyck's screen time is actually not a lot compared to like other people in the movie.
And that's also what makes it seem like a Wellesian role. Like you got to understand who Barbara Stanwyck is at this time. Like she's huge. She's been a major star for decades. And she's, I don't know what, maybe a Meryl Streep would be like an analog. She's been nominated. She's been a star. She's in the consciousness of people. And so she's larger than life. She's like John Wayne, like in terms of her ability to cast a shadow over the whole film and all of these other actors who are like, now we look at them and we see all these names. Like at the time it was Barbara Stanwyck and that guy Van Heflin and Lizbeth Scott, who we've heard of, and who is this guy Kirk Douglas. Maybe it's more like, oh, it's the time when Barbara Stanwyck and Louis Milestone. So I feel like that, like, in a way, that's part of the power of this film for her, and why I feel like it's Citizen Kane-like. Like, she is the tragic. In fact, it's a very similar story. Kane is the story of a kid who inherits a fortune that he doesn't want and spends the rest of his life trying to deal with the impact of that. And that's basically Martha Ivers' story. Is she inherits? She would rather have run away with Van Heflin. Instead, she inherits this, and her role is different. Like, since she's a woman, she has to invest all of her power in the Kirk Douglas character and be the woman behind the scenes. So there's an extra level of tragedy to her situation, in that she can't just buy a newspaper and become Kane. She has to be the wife who stands behind this weak alcoholic husband who has her kind of hostage because of what he knows about the murder from their childhood. Yeah. By the way, we should mention that Judith Anderson, that gothic quality you're talking about, well, she was in Rebecca, and she was in Laura, and she was in the Ten Commandments. Like the supporting cast in this is great. The other one that really blew me away was Anne Doran, I don't know how it's pronounced, who plays the flirty secretary. And I was like, oh, who is she? And I looked her up. I was like, oh my God, that's the mother from Rebel Without a Cause. Like, in 10 years, she goes from being the flirty secretary to being the horrible shrew mother. But she continued working all the way into 1988. So
and so I'm unfamiliar with Barbara Stanwyck. Like, I certainly know the name, and you are clearly a big fan. And there's other people that I'm friends with who go crazy for her, and like they go wild for Barbara Stanwyck. And so, like, is this sort of like the middle of her career, or is this sort of like, because she's about 40 when she made this? Is this sort of like, oh, let's bring this old star back and let's remember her? Or is this sort of like she was still going strong through until this movie? Like, I'm just trying to place, like, where, if I was a film goer in 1946 and Barbara Stanwyck's in a movie, is this like, oh, past her prime Barbara Stanwyck, or?
No, not at all. This is 4 years. This is 2 years after Double Indemnity.
Okay, all right.
No, that's the thing. That is the thing about Barbara Stanwyck, that I think she spans multiple decades as a thoroughly vital leading lady. Like, there's a point where she switched to being more of a TV actor. Yeah.
I wonder if that's why. I wonder if that's what took away some of the star power, was that she committed late 50s on up to being in mostly television, like the Big Valley and stuff like that. So, like, I wonder if that took away the mystery. Like, the mystery that's always there with film actors and especially actresses, maybe that went away because people saw her in their home all the time and kind of took her for granted. And it was like, oh, and back then TV actor meant less than movie actor. It's not like it is now. So just sort of like, oh, you're on TV, okay. So I wonder if that took away the mystique that then over time took away, like, like Humphrey Bogart never did TV, maybe that's part of why people don't remember her as well as these other big film stars. Do you think?
I don't know. Groucho Marx did TV. Joan Crawford did TV. I definitely feel like, for me, I remember getting into acting class when I was in my late teens in Hollywood. And I remember my acting teacher, Morgan Shepherd, going on about, we'd always pronounce, he's English, so we'd pronounce it Barbara Stanwyck. And I would just be like, he would just like, oh, that Stanwyck thing. I was like, what? And I had to go check it. And then you just sort of, to me, she's just one of those people where if you just start to go through it, it's just like, oh, she did this film and that film and that film. They're all classics. And so just to give you some sense to place, this film happens in between Double Indemnity in 44. And then this is 46. In 47, she was in The Two Mrs. Carols with Bogart, which is sort of like, I think, a lesser version of this film. Mm-hmm. Similar, but just not as good. Then she's in Sorry, Wrong Number with Burt Lancaster in 48. One of my favorites is 1952's Clash by Night. She's in with, I think it's Robert Ryan, and an early Marilyn Monroe performance, which is just one of the most dark, harsh, beautiful film. And this is maybe where Barbara Stanwyck is. So this is 1952, so she's starting to play older, but she's still very much a leading lady. But if you think that career that's in 1952, she's with Marilyn Monroe, this goes all the way back to the pre-Code era. Her first film as a star is in 1929.
Wow.
So 29, 39, 49, that's 20 for especially an actress of that era. I feel like that should put her, we should be talking about her the way we talk about Katharine Hepburn and Bette Davis.
Yeah.
Neither of them has a Double Indemnity or a Ball of Fire or a Lady Eve in their catalog. And those are just fun films that are just a joy to watch. And Barbara Stanwyck's amazing in them. It's
but
so
maybe,
funny.
maybe right.
Go on.
I was thinking like Bette Davis and Joan Crawford and these people that we love, like Katharine Hepburn, they are like this strong presence, like in the movies that they're in. And I wonder if because Barbara Stanwyck would often be cast against a very strong male actor, like a Kirk Douglas or Humphrey Bogart or whatever, if that is maybe what she's like in the shadow of these men, and she doesn't quite have the rise above in the way that like a Bette Davis or Katharine Hepburn does.
I guess, but as a young, I don't know. Usually, I guess that's it. Usually when she is cast with these men, she's the strong one. They're like in Ball of Fire, Gary Cooper is definitely pushed around by her. In Lady Eve, Henry Fonda is definitely pushed around by her. In Double Indemnity, Fred MacMurray is pushed around. Like, she's the one who dominates these men. She dominates. I don't know if she. Yeah, even in Clash by Night, Robert Ryan is tough, but she's definitely a woman taking charge in those. So I really don't know what it is. It's one of those things. It might just be like that prejudice against fun movies.
Yeah. Also, like she's really pretty, so maybe because she doesn't look tough. Like Bette Davis looks tough, you know, like Joan Crawford looks tough, like even Katharine Hepburn. Whereas there's a softness to the way Barbara Stanwyck looks. Like she's a very attractive woman. So maybe that's part of why people don't think of her as much as an actress, or more of a movie star. I don't know. Like I just feel like I want to know why the mystery of why is Barbara Stanwyck not top tier. I don't know.
And I mean, there are probably people who are like, well, come on, she's definitely. It's not like she's unknown. You're not talking about some unknown actress, and that's true.
Yeah.
To me, that's what I'm saying is like everyone will remember Double Indemnity and many of the films that she's in, but I feel like if she was seen the way that I think lesser movie star actors are seen, there would be more completists who dig in and find these gems. And this is no doubt a gem, which, by the way, we need to talk about the Easter egg. I'm watching this. I'm a follower of synchronicities. So I'd watched this film many times and I never brought out the IMDb, and I brought out the IMDb and I looked at it and was like, holy shit, Blake Edwards is in this film. Brian's going to lose his mind when he sees it. I had already told you. I had already chosen it. I didn't choose it because of that.
Because of my obsession.
Yes.
It's fun. And like he's not just an extra in the background. Like he's in a major moment of the movie. He's in the scene when Van Heflin crashes his car and has to be stuck in his hometown. So like you have him part of like this pivotal moment of the movie. Doesn't say anything because his character is falling asleep. He's sleepy. And what's interesting is, so Blake Edwards is in this movie for like a hot second. Like I didn't recognize him. I didn't recognize this young, handsome man until I looked at the IMDb and then I watched the scene again. And of course, this is the scene he's in because it's such a Blake Edwards scene. This sleepy guy, like this, it's almost like a comedic moment of like you have this sleepy sailor. There's a car that crashes. That's almost like a Blake Edwards slapsticky. Like he loves things breaking. You have the the themes of masculinity of this tough soldier guy who's now like regretting having to go back to this town. He doesn't want to go to this town. So it feels like a very Blake Edwards sort of moment that he's even in. He's bringing that to that scene. And in real life, Blake Edwards had a problem of constantly falling asleep and not being able to stay awake. I think he was a narcoleptic or something like that. So it's funny that his character was a person who could not stay awake. It was a rich, it's not a cameo because no one knew who he was. Just a rich little bit player moment from Blake Edwards. That was very exciting.
I like to imagine that Blake Edwards auditioned for the Kirk Douglas role. And they were like, no, we have this other Dembski kid that we're gonna do, but we like you. Come on back. We're good. You can have a little role. It's pivotal.
And then he's like, and it killed his career as an actor, and he's just like, fine, I'll just direct instead. Screw you guys. Direct. Be a filmmaker.
I think every time Blake Edwards saw Kirk Douglas in a movie after that, he's like, man, that could have been me.
But hey, you know what? He's more famous than Ben Heflin in the end, so Blake Edwards won in his own way.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Van Heflin, because I think he's kind of a revelation in this, right? I mean, I think he's incredibly cool. I think for that kind of character, that sort of smart talking, cigarette smoking, gambling, tough guy, former soldier, back in town, not taking any shit, getting beaten up and then coming back and just like loving and fighting and manipulating. I think he goes toe to toe with, Bogart is Bogart, but for Bogart types, I think he's right there.
Yeah.
What do you think?
He's an interesting person to have to star because he's, in my opinion, he's kind of weird looking. He kind of looks like a Dick Tracy villain. He's got like this big head.
Yeah.
And this like tiny face inside this big head. And he's not, I would not say he was handsome. So it's like you have this sort of, because it's funny to see him because like it took me a beat to recognize that he's supposed to be the bad boy character from the beginning. Because like he kind of has this, there's like a vulnerability in his face that when he shows up, even though he is like this gambling, like ex-Marine or whatever, like there's something like in his mind that seems like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to deal with this. I just want to get my car fixed. Like the classic kind of film noir hero. Like it's like, yeah, you're tough. You can hold yourself in a fight, but you are going to be the one who gets beaten up the most, and you're going to run through the ringer in this movie. And he's kind of perfect for that because he seems sort of innocent in a way, and it's just like it's not your typical tough guy actor. I feel because we know him from Shane as not like you said, he was sort of like the weaker person in that and had to become tough, and in this it's sort of like he seems more like a scared little boy than Kirk Douglas in a way, even though he is holding his own through all of this movie. You can tell he doesn't really want to be there.
Yeah, no, he's definitely the guy. That's one of the things is everyone thinks he's more of a threat than he is. He's one of these people, he comes in and because everyone feels guilty and defensive, he is seen as a threat as opposed to just a guy passing through town. So this sort of, it's one of those dynamics I really enjoy in film where there's a character who sort of has, like you said, like First Blood. But I feel like in this, I enjoy this kind of fighting back more because it happens inside of rooms without machine guns. But no, First Blood is great. And I like the connection you draw. But there's that quality of like, hey, I'm just trying to ... I'm just trying to get my car fixed and move on. And you keep making me fight with you to the point where now I'm going to kill you. I'm going to destroy you because you started picking on Lizbeth Scott. Now you're not just picking on me. And it makes him so heroic.
And if everyone just left him alone, there would be no problem.
There'd be no movie. Yeah.
There'd be no movie if they just let him be there. Even if when he goes to Kirk Douglas, he's like, oh, my old friend. let this lady out of prison. Can we just it's like she's okay. Like if they just let them, if that happened, he would have passed through and everyone would have gone about their business. Just like picking on this poor guy, picking on a war veteran.
And the title's great, The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, because she has a weird relationship with Kirk Douglas, and then she has this weird infatuation with Van Heflin, and that ends up being her desires and her love, broken and fractured as it is, that ends up driving all of the noir shenanigans that are happening sort of far beneath her. Like they're all sort of playthings. Like there's a point where she makes the call to the one of the things that sets all this in motion is she makes a call to the garage and tells them to not work so hard on Van Heflin's car. And then Kirk Douglas finds out about it and gets jealous. It's like, oh, you want him around. Well, so then there's this whole other dynamic. So now they're fighting with each other. Douglas and Barbara Stanwyck are fighting with each other through Van Heflin and Lizbeth Scott, which pisses him off even more.
And the title also works in it's The Men Have a Strange Love of Martha Ivers.
Right.
It works both ways. And I like that because it's like when Van Heflin gets kind of more involved with Martha again, you're like, wait a minute, you got Lizbeth Scott hanging out at your hotel. What are you doing? Like, why are you hanging out with this lady? She's married. There's something weird going on here. Why are you why are you ruining this other relationship?
Well, do you feel like it feels like he's either
humoring her
or playing her. Like there's this kiss and she's like, one more time for old time's sake. And he's like, sure, one more time for old time's sake. And then they kiss and they shoot it in such a weird way that you're like, this is not a good kiss. It's like there's just the way they shoot it is like he just realizes, oh, she's dead. She has cold, dead lips. I'm kissing a corpse.
And not to give the kind of one of the big plot points, but like I really love this whole movie is everybody assuming that he's there to mess with them and knows this dark secret. And then when she tells him the dark secret, he's like, oh, I didn't even know that happened. Like, this is the first I've heard it. And it's like, too late, guys. Now he is involved because they think he's there to blackmail them, but he really isn't. He just wants to get out of there.
Yeah.
And so when they're like, oh, we'll give you this or half the company or whatever, he's just like, he's kind of going along being like, I don't really need this, but sure. Okay, great. It's very, very funny. I'm glad I watched this because like I said, I'd never heard of it. Despite it having these famous people, it just isn't a movie that kind of came on my radar. It was actually nominated for one Oscar. So people liked it enough back then to at least nominate it for an Oscar for screenplay.
Robert
Rossen, Rossen, Rossen.
And Robert Riskin. Rossen and Riskin.
My favorite comedy team. The comedy stylings of Rossen and Riskin.
So curious. So what is your association with Stanwyck? Like, what are when I say Barbara Stanwyck to you, other than Big Valley, are there any, like, when you think of her, what are the films that you are aware of?
Nothing. Like, I didn't even remember she was in Double Indemnity. I know that as that Fred McMurray, Billy Wilder movie. Like, I just block her from my mind. I don't know if it's because. I don't know if it's like, I just don't know why, but I have a weird block, and then maybe this is a problem with other people. I know the name. I'm like, okay, Barbara Stanwyck. I know that name. That's the name of an actress from a long time ago that's famous. And if someone was like, what is she in? I'd be like, I can't tell you. But then you were like, oh, Lady Eve. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I know that movie. Okay. And I think she just she blends in with other people for me. And so I just kind of was like, got her confused with, and I'm just like, I don't know Barbara Stanwyck to Betty Grable. Like, in my mind, I'm just like, I don't know, some pretty lady from a long time ago. No. So I don't really have the.
No.
But there's definitely a richness. Like, I feel like
you're gonna walk away from this being like, I saw this great Blake Edwards film. It's called The Strange Love of Martha Ivers. There's some lady in it.
I think maybe it's because of the way she looks. It's sort of like why I'm not drawn to watching a Kevin Costner or Robert Redford movie. I'm just like, oh yeah, it's some white person. I don't know, like like more of a character actor. Like I'm drawn to weirder faces. So when people are pretty, I automatically assume, oh, they're not going to be very interesting. I don't need to watch that. But then when I do watch it, I'm like, oh, shame on me for thinking that. I am wrong. Like these people are really good, and they're just like, they didn't choose to be made so beautiful. This is how they are. And they can also be very good actors and actresses. But I'm glad to watch this because now I want to watch more Barbara Stanwyck.
Oh, yes. Yes. And track her. She is, I mean, that's the thing is she was a movie star from the jump. So there's a kind of, like a John Wayne film is a John Wayne film. A Bogart film is a Bogart film. A Barbara Stanwyck film is a Barbara Stanwyck film. And the way she's used in them, there's just, I mean, I'm speaking as if I know her work. I'm only someone who really only knows the highlights. Maybe 15 films out of like 50 that she's made.
Yeah.
So, I still have the work to do.
Do you call yourself a music fan? Are you the one making the playlist for all the parties? Then you gotta listen to the Pinch Music Podcast, where we interview musicians, engineers, producers, and music lovers of all types. We even put together playlists for any and all occasions. So if you want to have the Beatles versus Stones debate, pick up some engineering tips, or just discover a new artist, you gotta check out the Pinch Music Podcast, all a part of the Paper House Network.
Well, here we are talking with Kristen Lopez of the Ticklish Business podcast. And I wanted to talk with Kristen because, as you heard from our podcast so far, I'm a fan of Barbara Stanwyck. Brian is totally ignorant of her charms and being won over by Strange Love of Martha Ivers. But I wanted to bring in someone who's devoted their life, dare I say, to the films of the classic era. So that's why you're here, Kristen.
I'm willing to, stake my life on classic filmdom. I think that's accurate.
Of course, I encourage everyone to check out Ticklish Business. I love the podcast, and I love what you do. But you're here because, I want you to help fill in some of the blanks. I figure if Brian, who knows so much about movies, can be in the dark about Barbara Stanwyck, I feel like we got some work to do. So help fill in some of the blanks here. Now, am I right that Barbara Stanwyck is, is it just the way it seems to me, or does she seem to fall below some of the other, like Katharine Hepburn and Joan Crawford and Bette Davis and some of the other actresses of her era in terms of fame and awareness?
I definitely think in terms of awareness, there's not a whole lot of memeability to Barbara Stanwyck, unfortunately, compared to being able to kind of easily find gifs of or interviews with Katharine Hepburn, or Bette Davis did a lot of interviews well into the 1980s. And I mean, Barbara Stanwyck lived well into the 1980s, and she didn't die until January of 1990. So she'd certainly been a presence for a long time and had a burgeoning television career that lasted into the 1980s as well. But I think a lot of people who are just very casual about classics and that, they know the bare basics of the time period don't really remember her because there is that lack of ubiquity to her. Once you start kind of even being more casually associated with classic films, it's kind of hard to ignore her. But I do feel that there tends to be less of a kind of social media viral quality to her. And I think that that's because she's really not imitatable. You don't get a lot of people imitating her on SNL, because she didn't have a lot of things that made her someone you could imitate. Like Katharine Hepburn and Bette Davis both had the voice that everybody kind of had an imitation of them, or she wasn't as gaudy and over the top as like a Liz Taylor. So I think that just the sense of pop culture having a very small short-term memory makes it hard for a lot of people who have a very bare-bones knowledge of classic film to really know who she is, let alone what the type of woman that she was in the films that she made.
So when you're trying to turn a friend on to Barbara Stanwyck, what are the films that you recommend to them?
Oh my gosh. Everybody does Double Indemnity. That's kind of the easiest one, mostly for the Billy Wilder quality to it, that rapid fire. It's a great example of film noir. It's film noir 101. It's a lot of fun, but I don't necessarily think it shows her talents. She's got that unfortunate wig on, and it's really Fred McMurray's star vehicle, but she is brilliant, and I can see why it's often the film that most people know her from. For me, I think the easiest way to get into her work is through the two Christmas films that she did. Remember the Night, which also has Fred McMurray, and Christmas in Connecticut, which is one of my favorite Christmas movies of all time. And you can see that she's a very modern performer by 1940 standards. Her films were very much, I don't want to use the term feminist, but she was very much in the vein of not being as hardened and cold as a Joan Crawford, but still being her own woman. So those are the films that I always recommend. If you really want an easy way to get everybody together and enjoy something, her Christmas features are so great. They're a perfect example of her persona.
And I know you're also you're better versed in pre-code films than most of the people I know. Do you have any pre-code favorites of around Barbara Stanwyck?
Yeah, well, I mean, most people who kind of delve into pre-code, it's hard not to hear about Babyface, which is the film that she made in that pre-code era. It's from 1933, and she plays a young woman who wants to be able to take care of herself, but has been sexually exploited her entire life, and decides to literally climb up the ladder of power by seducing various men. And she's a lot of fun. I mean, she's kind of blousy. She's very venal. She's a character that you love to hate. And she's also a character that is sexual and just kind of pounces on the screen. The ending, of course, had to be changed due to the beginnings of the code. So it's a little hokey, but she's really good in it. For me, the one that I always throw out is Night Nurse that she did, I think around the same time. It's from 1931, so it's about 2 years earlier, and that is full pre-code. She stars as a night nurse, a live-in nurse, who is taking care of two young children that, as the plot goes on, she comes to realize that they're being poisoned by the family chauffeur, who is Clark Gable, in just full villain mode. So if you've ever wanted to see her and Clark Gable spar, it's a lot of fun. But it's a lot of pre-code goodness in the fact that there's a lot of violence to it. There's women undressing. There's, a weird moment with skeletons that's just very odd. And she's got a great camaraderie with Joan Blondell, who is also a well-known pre-code star of that era. It's a lot of fun. It's a film that doesn't shy away from the darkness of filmdom. Any movie that's going to have children almost dying is just, it's nuts. But I think that in her pre-code, you got a really good example of the type of woman that she was, which is someone who was uncompromising, who knew what she wanted and was able to take a punch in the face from Clark Gable, still get up, and you didn't beat her down, and it's fantastic to see.
Nice. Well, let's focus in a little bit on Strange Love of Martha Ivers. Now, again, you've heard our podcast so far. Do you feel like there were any notes or anything, any specifics, specific history of that film that you are aware of that we missed?
I'm not thinking of anything specific. I mean, Strange Love of Martha Ivers is a really weird one for me. It's a film that I've seen probably the least out of all of her features. And some of that is personal bias. Some of that is mostly just the fact that it's got a really stacked cast. I mean, you have Barbara Stanwyck, you have Van Heflin, you have Lizbeth Scott, and there's just always seems to be something that keeps me at a remove from that movie. And I think a lot of it is there's that kind of going back and forth in time. But I think it's almost like I want to use the term programmer. You know, it just kind of feels like a studio film that she would have made in the 1940s. It's basic. It's a basic film to me. I think she did.
I love that movie.
I mean, I think there's not a bad Barbara Stanwyck movie. I want that to be known. I mean, even some stuff that's not good, like Cry Wolf, which I actually think is from the same year as the release of Strangelove and Martha Ivers. I think even a bad movie is still entertaining just because she's in it. But yeah, it's hard to say that this is my favorite. You know, there are some movies that she just kind of, I mean, obviously the studio dictated who did what, but for 1946, you know, it's a good film noir. It's not the best film though that she made that year, which I always say the best film she made in 1946 is My Reputation, which is a very different genre, complete 180 from this movie. Yeah, so I mean, it's a movie that I appreciate, but it's just not my go-to Babs. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I mean, and now I have to ask because you said it. You said you have a prejudice against the film?
I have a bit of you know, I have a personal bias against this in some way.
Well, can we touch on that at all? Because,
sure. Oh yeah, always.
Okay. So I assume it's the arrival of one Kirk Douglas on the scene. Because you the last time we listeners won't know this, but I guess we can pull down the curtain a little bit. We had worked on what may become a podcast in the future, but we had spent some time talking about Warren Beatty, and in that conversation, Kirk Douglas came up, and you had also mentioned that you had a certain antipathy towards him, but it was right after his death, and you felt a little bit uncomfortable talking about it. Are you in a place where are we far enough away from that you feel comfortable talking about where your misgivings are about Kirk Douglas?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do want to throw out just you know, it's a bit of background. I mean, he did not get along with Barbara Stanwyck when they made this movie. You know, he definitely, when they made Strangelove of Martha Ivers, he actually wrote after they made it that, you know, she was pretty indifferent to him, didn't really praise him as a performer. And, you know, the one compliment she gave him was, you know, hey, you're pretty good. And he didn't really care. And he just kind of was like, oh, whatever. And the two kind of had this cordial type of relationship, but they were never friends. And I think that Babs might have had some good taste. Yeah, I don't like Kirk Douglas as a person. Your listeners are welcome to Google, you know, him and Natalie Wood. I'm Team Natalie. You'll never get me to not believe the allegations against him. So it's hard to watch, you know, some of the movies that he made, particularly where he's supposed to be kind of like a romantic lead or this, you know, kind of like sexually virile other man.
Well, then you must have loved this one because he's a simpering alcoholic wimp.
Exactly. And, you know, I think that's the hardest thing for me to deal with because he did that a lot in certain movies. And I kind of enjoy that. You know, a great movie that I love in spite of Kirk Douglas being in it is A Letter to Three Wives, where he plays English teacher, I believe, that is just completely ignored and apathetic to it. Just the women around him are just like, whatever, go over there. And I love that. You know, I love that there's a small subset of Kirk Douglas films where women are just kind of like, you're not special, dude. We're not into you. I wish there were more of them. But yeah, it's hard for me to watch, you know, any movie where you're supposed to sympathize with him because I'm like, I won't. I can't do it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. With Strange, like we even talked about it. It's kind of funny that, like the way they talk about him, they treat it. The movie does not like Kirk Douglas's character at all.
No.
In this, and well, so let's move on from this just a little bit. I had one other thing I wanted to get into with you, which is just sort of Barbara Stanwyck's longevity as a movie star, which seems pretty phenomenal to me when I look at the decades that her career spanned. And then on top of that, she has this whole career as a TV star. But what would you say brackets her time as a top of the bill opening a movie star?
Oh my gosh. So, I mean, I think her career really, really started with her pre-code work with Night Nurse in 1931, the early 1930s. And then she had a pretty strong slate of hits and becoming a reliable actress up until, you know, the mid 50s. And she transitioned very seamlessly into television when a lot of actors really saw television in the 1950s as a come down, unless you were an up-and-coming star, and then you could backtrack, so you could do television and then get into movies. But if you were already an established movie star and you were going to TV, it was seen as your time had faded. But that didn't really happen for her. I mean, she really embraced, after, you know, about 1957, she really did go embrace and do television. And she kind of did a couple things here. She briefly had her own show called The Barbara Stanwyck Show, but I'd say that her real comeback didn't really hit until 1965 when she started doing The Big Valley. And that just kind of continued her career up until the 1980s when she did the Thornbirds miniseries. She appeared on Dynasty, and then she ended up doing The Colbys for a season. So she really did have her comeback was big, but it seemed like she had a very small amount of downtime. You know, there wasn't really a whole lot of time where she wasn't Barbara Stanwyck. And when she did The Big Valley, you know, they gave her the special addendum on her name of Ms. Barbara Stanwyck, which she didn't really care for. She thought that it was kind of elevating her and putting her on a pedestal in a way that she wasn't really interested in. But it really did show that she still had that ability to draw in audiences. So really, I mean, she wasn't struggling after, you know, her movie career ended. She really did find a second wind seriously in television. And
what do you consider to be, is there a film that you feel like is sort of like the last great Barbara Stanwyck film? Like I haven't seen it, but I'm looking here at There's Always Tomorrow. She did a Douglas Sirk film in 1955 that I'm very interested in. Have you seen that?
I have seen it. I think actually Kino just put out a Blu-ray, if memory serves. Don't quote me on that. And it's definitely Douglas Sirk at his like children are horrible, family's bad, go with the other woman type of narrative. And she is very good. I always kind of rag on 1950s Barbara Stanwyck. They gave her that unfortunate poodle cut, and she had such great hair in the 1940s, and the 50s is very unfortunate. But you can tell it's kind of B-level Sirk, but even B-level is still really good. For me, yeah, There's Always Tomorrow is kind of the last one. I'd say maybe Witness to Murder from 1954 is really her last big noir. But I think a lot of people tend to point to Roustabout from 1964, the movie she did with Elvis Presley, as kind of the last big Barbara Stanwyck moment. And it almost feels kind of like a passing of the torch, even though it's really not, in terms of having a great actress of the golden era like Barbara Stanwyck playing in the sandbox of Elvis Presley's world, who would come to dominate the 1960s with his features.
Well, I thought it was funny when I always think of 57 as being the rock and roll turning point. So yeah. When you said that her career, she started to switch to TV in 57, it's like, oh, well, she was just meant for that other era. But then luckily she was able to transition, and, you know, the post rock and roll era, she's a small screen star. Well, before we wrap things up, are there any other either highlights in Stanwyck's career that you'd like to mention, or any other just pieces of information about her as an artist that you feel are important to share?
Yeah, well, I always recommend My Reputation. I mentioned it earlier. It's from 1946. It's a great movie in the Sirkian vein, although it's not a Douglas Sirk movie, where she plays a widow who wants to find love again, and her, you know, children in society is telling her, no, you can't do that. You have to be a professional widow forever. Ball of Fire, that was actually one that I just discovered this year. I watched favorites. It for the first time. So and She's so good. I mean, and anything she does with Preston Sturges, in The Lady Eve, any of her Fonda films are great. I also love The Mad Miss Manton, which is, I think, her first film that she did with Henry Fonda. And I know a lot of people kind of point to her chemistry with Fred McMurray, and no, I think she had more chemistry with Henry Fonda. I think that's awesome. And a shout out to her appearance in Titanic in 1953, which is a big budget Jean Novelesco kind of portmanteau type of movie where there's so many stars and it's just insane, and you're waiting for the Titanic to sink. It's not a great movie by any stretch of the imagination, but I love it for the sheer factoid that Barbara Stanwyck, who was, I believe, in her 40s, started a long-term relationship with Robert Wagner, who was in his 20s. And I just applaud Barbara for that. Just feels like a complete Bab Stanwyck type of thing to engage in this affair with a younger man, and it all happened on Titanic. So I guess that's my favorite little fact that I know about her that I always have to throw out.
And somehow there's more Natalie Wood adjacent material.
It always comes back to Natalie.
Hi, I'm Brian.
And I'm AJ.
And we have a podcast called The Director's Wall,
examining a filmmaker's career, film by film. First up was M. Night Shyamalan, then Francis Ford Coppola. Who's next? Is there anything to this whole auteur theory? Find out on
The Director's Wall.
Subscribe via Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or your preferred listening platform.
Yeah, if I can inspire you and those listening to give, let me just say I really highly recommend Clash by Night. I highly recommend. I don't highly recommend, but I do recommend the two Mrs. Carols. Lady Eve and Meet John Doe and Ball of Fire are must sees. Everyone must see these three films. And then I really need to get to know more about her pre-code work. I feel like there's a couple of films. I was dating a woman who was really into Barbara Stanwyck's pre-code stuff, and I remember we watched a couple of those and a couple of Jean Harlow films together. But I need to do more work on that on that side of things. She was also in the Joey Bishop show, so I wish I had asked Larry Bishop about it. Maybe I'm sure he has a Barbara Stanwyck story.
I'm sure he has a story for everything.
So, any last thoughts on this picture before we, I don't know, move to whatever wrap up we have?
No, I'm good. I'm into your strange love of Barbara Stanwyck.
My strange love of Barbara Stanwyck. Yes, I should say one of the things, I guess, sort of a personal bugaboo about this is I have had many people, particularly women who I talk with about Barbara Stanwyck, sort of have this weird homophobic response, what kind of man are you that you like Barbara Stanwyck? And I think maybe that's also part of it. I'm like, why don't the women who are championing the great women of film champion Barbara Stanwyck more? What is it about her that makes her some sort of, it has some kind of, and maybe this is just a few weird people I know, and that we're going to find that out in this World is Wrong podcast, that I think a lot of the reasons that we choose these films is because of specific conversations we may have had with people that then make us think that the whole world feels that way. And there's probably a huge cult out there for this film and for Barbara Stanwyck, and they're listening to this being like, who are you talking to? Come to our meetings. We love Barbara Stanwyck, and we love you, and we want to introduce you. If you haven't seen Illicit, you must see Illicit today. You haven't seen Shopworn? Come on, kid. Get with the program. Okay, well, that's the Strange Love of Martha Ivers from 1946, and I don't know if I should try and. I mean, there's no one to get an interview with who was involved.
They're all
in this.
dead.
Yeah. I could maybe reach out to someone who's more of a scholar. Maybe I'll see if I can find someone who really knows Barbara Stanwyck better than you or I, who can take me to task a little bit about like some of my blind spots in this.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So okay, and well, let me tell the audience. Brian has this other podcast. It's called The Director's Wall. He hosts it with a very smart guy named AJ Gonzalez. They were co-workers at Vulcan Video, and you'll see AJ in the film on our website. There's a little film I made of the interviewing the folks at Vulcan Video, and AJ's in that, and they talk about a director and go through the director's whole catalog. And they went through M. Night Shyamalan, and now they're, as of this recording, they're in the middle of going through the works of Francis Ford Coppola.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah. The most recent episode was on Godfather Part 2. Really, really excellent episode. They're just like Coppola at that time. They're in the middle of a great run, talking about Godfather, The Conversation, Godfather 2, and up next, Apocalypse Now.
No, we're going to do the Godfather TV edit, the one in order.
Okay.
That's the next episode. And you can find Andras on the Radio 8 Ball Show, which is also a great podcast. And don't you normally do that live, but because we're stuck at home, you have to do it from your sad, sweaty apartment?
Yes. Yes, my sad, sweaty apartment.
But it's a great show. It's you answer questions by picking songs at random. It's one of the more pleasant podcasts, I got to say. I listened to one the other day, and it was like there's something really nice about it. Are they always so positive, or are these the new ones positive?
Which one did you listen to?
I listened to the Raina Rose one, who is from Austin, Texas, who lives here in Austin.
Oh yeah.
But it just seems like it's almost like this in a way, like you're just talking to people. And you're like, you have this nice music, and it just feels like I don't get mad listening to it, which is good.
Well, yeah, I'm the only one who gets mad listening to it. Like, why did you say that stupid thing, Andras? Leave it in. But
anyways, you should tune into that. It's great. You've recently had Kelvin Johnson on there, hometown hero from Olympia, Kelvin Johnson, and you had Portland singer-songwriter Mike Wilcox. So tune into Radio 8 Ball Show.
Yeah, excellent. Well, so I do hope that people check out both of our other podcasts if you enjoy what we're doing here. And if you enjoy what you're doing here, please give us great ratings and reviews. Please share this with your friends who love films, particularly this episode. If you have a friend out there who keeps trying to talk with you about Barbara Stanwyck, throw him a bone. Throw him a bone.
Okay. So the next episode, I'm excited. We're going to be doing The Imposters. So tune in to us talk about The Imposters.
Yes, and if you have thoughts and feelings, ideas, suggestions you want to share with us, you can contact us through the contact link on our website at theworldiswrongpodcast.com. And this film is available, I think, The Strange Love of Martha Ivers you can find on Canopy. And Canopy is a great site where if you have a library card, you can become a member. You can get you can have access to a lot of free films. I heard about this from Patton Oswalt on another podcast, giving a shout out to it, and so I'm now giving a shout out to him for introducing it to me, and now I'm introducing it to you. So,
wonderful.
So thanks a lot, and thanks, Brian, for spending this hour talking with me about a film that I love, and now you know about.
Yes.
And wherever you are out there, just remember, the world is wrong, and it's probably wrong about you.
Let's take a look at it.
$8.95. How do you like it?
With you in it.
Hello, Sam.
Tony.
Yes, Sam? I heard you talking.
Well, even a crummy hotel like this has a switchboard.
I have special privileges in this hotel, Sam. I own it.
It's Miss O'Neill, Tony.
Hello. So this is the girl. Tony's my name. Antonia Maricek. The sunsuit looks very well on her, Sam. She's got just the figure for it. She's a very pretty girl. I give another show at 8 o'clock. In your room or here?
Tony.
Yes, Sam.
Miss O'Neill is sorry she said that.
I'm sorry I said that. Okay, forget it.
Tony.
Yes, Sam.
I'm going out with Miss O'Neill on business. That's why you came here, isn't it?
Yes?
I'll be back after a little while.
I got no place to go. I'll be here.
I didn't like that.
I apologize.
Well, there was ice on your tongue.
If you want me to say anything else to her.
You spoke your piece. Let's get out of here.
I've never been in a hotel room like this before.
I've been in too many.
Just the way you read about it in books. Window shade, scotch on the dresser. Let's stay here, Sam.
No.
Why not? We can order our dinner here.
I don't like room service.
All right, Sam.
Come on, let's go.